The wind that night did not merely blow, it scoured. It was a living, malevolent thing, carrying the grit of the Arizona territory, thousands of miles of parched earth to strip the paint from the siding and the hope from the soul. The year was 1880. The drought had held the land by the throat for 2 years, turning the grama grass into brittle wire and the riverbeds into cracked mosaics of dried mud. Inside the small, weathering cabin that clung to the edge of the Dragoon Mountains, Eleanor Hartley lay awake. Everyone called her Nell. At 26 years of age, she had the hands of a laborer and the eyes of someone who had seen too many horizons and not enough kindness. She lay still on her cot, listening to the wind rattle the window pane. But underneath the howling of the gale, she heard a sound that chilled her more than the desert night air. It was the sound of her father's voice, raised in a desperate, pleading whine. "I just need another week," Silas Hartley was saying. His voice cracked, a sound like dry wood snapping. "Just 7 days. The rains are coming. I can feel it in my knee. Once the grass greens up, the horses will fill out, and I can sell the foal." A second voice answered him. It was a low, smooth baritone, devoid of empathy, like a stone dropping into a deep well. "Your knee is not collateral, Silas, and your horses are rib cages wrapped in hide. I did not ride all the way out from Cedar Flats in a dust storm to discuss meteorology." Nell shifted silently, swinging her legs off the cot. She wore a simple cotton shift, worn thin at the elbows. Her feet touched the rough wooden floorboards, cool and gritty with the ever-present dust. She crept toward the door that separated her small room from the main living area, pressing her ear against the rough-hewn timber. "The debt stands at $400, the stranger said, plus interest." "That brings us to $550. Nell stifled a gasp. $550. That was a fortune. That was enough to buy a small herd or a new life entirely. How had Silas let it go this far? She knew he drank whiskey was the only thing he consumed with any consistency, but this was beyond a bar tab. This was ruin. "I don't have it," Silas whispered. The shame in his voice was palpable, a heavy, suffocating thing. "I know," the stranger replied. Then came a sound that made Nell's stomach turn. It was the heavy, metallic clink of silver dollars being stacked on the table. In the silence of the cabin, the coins did not ring like bells. They clanked like the heavy links of a prison chain being pulled tight. "But you have assets. You have things of value, Silas, if you are willing to be creative." Nell stepped back from the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached up to her throat, her fingers finding the cool, smooth stone of her necklace. It was a piece of raw turquoise, roughly polished, suspended on a simple leather thong. Her mother had given it to her before the fever took her 10 years ago. Her mother had called the stone the sky crumbled into pieces. It was the only thing of true beauty Nell owned, a reminder that there was a world above the dust and the debt. She gripped the stone tightly. She was not a child. She ran this ranch while her father chased phantom schemes and bottled courage. She fixed the fences. She birthed the foals. And she negotiated the price of feed at the livery stable in town. She was the one who read the newspapers to the illiterate ranch hands who passed through, translating the world for them. She was strong, but listening to the clink of those coins, she felt a sudden, terrifying fragility. Miles away, under the cover of the same abrasive wind, the land held other secrets. In the deep shadows of a box canyon, where the moonlight struggled to penetrate the overhang of red rock, a small band of people moved with the silence of smoke. They were the people whom the white settlers called Apache. They were moving south, away from the aggressive patrols of the cavalry and the erratic violence of the scalp hunters who roamed the borderlands for blood money. Taza crouched on a ridge overlooking the dry wash. He was a young man, perhaps 30 years of age, with a body honed by a life of constant motion. His hair was black and coarse, cut at the shoulders, held back by a strip of red cloth. He wore buckskins that blended with the sandstone and the sagebrush, and his eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned the darkness with the intensity of a hawk. He did not like being this close to the settlements. The air here smelled of wood smoke and cattle, the scents of the encroachers. The bluecoats are 2 days behind, a voice murmured beside him. Taza turned his head slightly. It was his father, Nantan. The chief was an older man, his face a map of deep lines etched by the sun and the burden of leadership. Nantan did not move like an old man. He moved with a deliberate, conserved energy. "They are heavy," Taza replied in their own tongue, though he threw in the English word for heavy. He had learned some English years ago, during a brief, ill-fated period of truce when he had served as a scout and translator. He spoke it with a hard, flat intonation. "Their wagons cut deep ruts. They cannot move through the high passes. It is not the soldiers I fear tonight," Nantan said softly. He gestured with his chin toward the distant, flickering lights of the town of Cedar Flats, glowing like embers on the horizon. "It is the hunger of the towns. When the white men are hungry, they look for someone to blame. They look for us." Taza looked back at the darkness. He felt a tightness in his chest, a familiar coil of anger and responsibility. He was not a cruel man. He had seen enough death to know that it solved very little. But he was a protector. His people were starving, pushed from the hunting grounds, their water sources fenced off by men who claimed ownership of the earth itself. "We will keep moving," Taza said. "Past the Sleeping Rock, toward the mountains of Mexico. Be watchful," Nantan advised, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "The coyotes are not the only things hunting in the dark." Taza nodded. He looked once more toward the isolated ranches scattered across the flats. He saw a faint light from a single cabin window miles away, the Hartley place. He knew of the man who lived there, a man with weak spirit. Taza looked away. The lives of the white settlers were a tangle of greed and fear he wished to avoid. He slipped back into the shadows, disappearing as if he had never been there. Morning broke over the Hartley ranch with a bleached, unforgiving light. The wind had died down, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and expectant. Nell rose before the sun. She dressed in her usual attire, a faded calico shirt and a split riding skirt that allowed her to straddle a horse. The women in Cedar Flats clicked their tongues when they saw her, whispering behind gloved hands about her lack of propriety, unnatural. They called her a woman doing a man's work. But a skirt wouldn't mend a roof, and a corset wouldn't break a colt. She walked out to the small corral. The 2 remaining horses, a roan mare and a skittish gelding, looked at her with mournful eyes. She tossed them the last of the hay, watching dust motes dance in the shaft of sunlight hitting the barn floor. "Morning, Nell." She turned. Silas stood in the doorway of the barn. He looked terrible. His skin was gray and pasty, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with dark circles. He wore his best coat, though it was frayed at the cuffs, and he had shaved, leaving several small nicks on his chin. "Morning, Pa," Nell said, keeping her voice even. She brushed the hay from her hands. "I heard voices last night." Silas flinched. It was a small movement, a twitch of the eye, but Nell saw it. He looked away, focusing intently on a rusted horseshoe hanging on a nail. "Just business, Nell, just trying to settle some accounts." "With $500? She asked sharply. Silas paled. "You were listening." "I have ears. Pa, who was he?" "A man named Barlow. He buys horses. He buys goods." Silas wiped sweat from his upper lip. Though the morning was still cool, he walked over to the roan mare and patted its neck with a trembling hand. "We have a way out. Nell, a way to clear the slate. All of it. The tab at the saloon, the feed bill, the mortgage." Nell felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. "How? We have nothing left to sell." Silas turned to her. He tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace of pain. "I made a deal. A trade. We just have to deliver the stock to a meeting point, up near the jagged canyon. Barlow has a buyer waiting there." "What stock?" Nell demanded. "These 2 nags. They aren't worth $50 together, let alone $500. "It is a complex deal," Silas said quickly, rushing his words. "Barlow deals in specialty items. Listen, Nell, I need you to help me. I need you to drive the buckboard. My hands are shaking too bad today." Nell looked at her father. She saw the fear in him, the desperate, pathetic hope. She had spent her life cleaning up his messes, guiding him home when he was too drunk to find the door, lying to the bankers to buy him time. She was the parent. He was the wayward child. "If we do this," Nell said slowly, "if we clear the debt, will you stop? Will you stop the cards and the whiskey?" "I swear it," Silas said, and tears welled in his eyes. He reached out and grasped her shoulders. His grip was weak. "I swear it on your mother's grave. Eleanor, this is the last time. I just need you to trust me. Wear your blue dress, the one with the lace." Nell frowned. "To drive a wagon to a canyon. We might have to go into town after." Silas lied, the fabrication slipping out with practiced ease. "To sign the papers at the bank. You want to look respectable. Don't you show those biddies in Cedar Flats that the Hartleys still have dignity." The mention of the town stung her pride, just as he knew it would. Cedar Flats was a crucible of judgment. She remembered the last time she had been there, walking past the mercantile. Dr. Reynolds had tipped his hat to her, but his wife had pulled him away as if Nell were contagious. "She is 26 and lives alone with that drunkard," they whispered. "She reads books instead of the Bible. She rides like a man." Nell stiffened. She would not let them see her broken. She would not let them see her poor. "Fine," she said. "I will change, but then we go. And after this, Pa, you hand the ledger over to me. For good." "Yes," Silas breathed, relief washing over his face, making him look younger for a second. "Yes, anything you say. Nell." He turned away to hide his face, but Nell saw the shudder that went through him. She thought it was relief. She did not know it was the violent trembling of a man who had just sold his soul and was about to hand over the only pure thing left in his life to pay the price. The journey began at noon. The heat had returned with a vengeance, shimmering off the hardpan in waves that distorted the distance. Nell sat on the buckboard seat, the reins in her gloved hands. She wore the blue dress. It was tight at the collar and impractical for the dust, but she sat with her back straight, her chin high. Silas sat beside her, clutching a bottle of water. Though Nell suspected it was mixed with gin, he spoke little. Every time the wagon hit a rut, he jumped. They moved away from the main road, heading toward the broken lands where the earth split open into canyons and arroyos. It was dangerous country, Apache country. People said, "Why are we meeting so far out?" Nell asked, squinting against the glare. "Barlow's buyer. He values privacy." Silas muttered, "He is a man who moves between the territories." Nell felt a prickle of unease at the base of her neck. She touched the turquoise pendant hidden beneath the high collar of her dress. The landscape here was alien, beautiful and terrifying. Giant saguaros stood like sentinels with their arms raised in surrender or warning. The red rock cliffs loomed closer, casting long, purple shadows. She thought of the town she had left behind. Cedar Flats, a place of wooden false fronts and false piety. A place where the sheriff, a man with a tin star and a lead heart, looked at the Apache people not as humans, but as vermin to be exterminated. A place where a woman without a husband was considered a failure, a wild thing that needed to be broken or discarded. "I am not a thing," Nell thought fiercely. "I am Eleanor Hartley." She looked at her father. He was staring ahead, his eyes fixed on a cluster of rocks in the distance where a black carriage stood waiting. A man was standing beside it, even from this distance. Nell recognized the posture. It was the stranger from the night before. "Barlow. Pa," Nell said, slowing the horses. "Why is he alone? Where's the stock we are trading?" Silas did not answer. He was sweating profusely now. "Pa!" Nell pulled back on the reins. The horses stopped, snorting and stamping. "Keep driving. Nell," Silas whispered, his voice trembling. "Please, just keep driving. We have nothing in the wagon," Nell said, her voice rising. The realization hit her slowly, like a dark cloud creeping over the sun. She looked at the empty bed of the wagon behind them. Then she looked at her father's terrified face, Then she looked at the blue dress she was wearing. "The trade," she whispered. "The item of value." "It is not like that," Silas choked out. He knows a man, a wealthy man. He wants a wife. It is a marriage. Nell, just a marriage. You will be taken care of. You won't have to starve on this dust heap anymore." "You are lying," Nell said. The betrayal felt like a physical blow, a knife twisting in her gut. "You sold me." "I had no choice," Silas shouted, the fear finally exploding out of him. "He was going to hang me. Nell, they found the crates, the contraband. I am a dead man if I don't pay him." Nell didn't scream. She didn't cry. She felt a cold, hard clarity descend upon her. She looked at the turquoise pendant, her thumb tracing the rough stone. The sky crumbled. Her world had just crumbled. The man who had raised her, the man she had protected, had weighed her life against his own and found hers lighter. She looked at the reins in her hands. She looked at the whip. "I am not going," she said. Her voice was low, vibrating with a fury that had been building for 26 years. "Nell, please." Silas reached for the reins. "I am not your property," she hissed. She stood up in the wagon, the blue dress billowing in the wind. She looked like a statue of judgment, down in the canyon. The man named Barlow watched them, and high up on the ridge, unseen by the father, the daughter, or the debt collector. Taza and the Apache scouts watched them too. They saw the wagon stop. They saw the argument. They saw the woman stand up, a figure of blue against the red earth. Taza narrowed his eyes. He did not know what was being said, but he knew the body language of betrayal when he saw it. He adjusted the grip on his rifle. The wind picked up again, whipping dust into a frenzy, obscuring the wagon, turning the scene into a ghostly tableau. Nell stood firm, the wind tearing at her hair. She did not know what the next hour would bring. She did not know that the man waiting for her had no intention of marriage. She did not know that her father's betrayal was deeper than she could imagine. But as she stood there, suspended between the life she knew and the abyss opening before her, she made a silent vow to the vast, empty sky. She would not be currency. She would not be a victim. If she was to fall, she would fall fighting, and she would take as much of this cruel world with her as she could. She raised the whip, not to strike the horses, but to strike her father's hand away from the brake. The wind howled, drowning out Silas's sob, and the story of Eleanor Hartley truly began. The crack of the whip did not bring freedom. It brought violence. Before the leather lash could snap against the flank of the roan mare, a heavy hand seized Nell's wrist. The grip was crushing, bruising the bone. Barlow had moved with a speed that belied his languid posture. He yanked the whip from her grasp and threw it into the dust. With his other hand, he grabbed the front of her high-collared blue dress and hauled her down from the buckboard seat. Nell landed hard on the unforgiving earth. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. She scrambled backward, her boots scraping against the gravel. But Barlow was already looming over her. He looked different up close. The smooth veneer of the businessman had vanished, replaced by the cold, predatory focus of a man who viewed the world solely in terms of leverage and liquidation. "Silas," Barlow said, not looking away from Nell. "Control your asset, or I will damage it." Silas Hartley scrambled down from the wagon. He was weeping. It was a pathetic, sniveling sound that made Nell's skin crawl. He did not go to her. He did not stand between his daughter and the man threatening her. Instead, he dropped to his knees in the dirt and began gathering papers that had spilled from his coat pocket during the commotion. One of the papers fluttered toward Nell. The wind pinned it against a sagebrush. Nell stared at it. It was not a marriage license. It was not a deed to a new homestead. It was a bill of sale. The handwriting was jagged, hasty, but the words were legible enough. Received $450 in exchange for one female, white, breeding age, to be delivered to the Canyon Rendezvous. Note settlement of debt regarding shipment of 12 Henry rifles. The world stopped spinning. The wind went silent in her ears. "Rifles," Nell whispered. She looked up at her father. He was clutching the other papers to his chest, refusing to meet her eyes. "You are not just a drunk. Pa, you are a smuggler." "I had to," Silas wailed. "The drought killed the herd. Nell, I had to move the product. But I lost the shipment. The river took it. Barlow." He holds the note on the guns. "It is hanging offense. Federal prison or the rope. So you trade me instead." Nell stood up. Her legs shook, not with fear, but with a rage so hot it felt like it could scorch the desert clean. "You trade me to save your neck from a noose you tied yourself." "It is a trade," Barlow corrected her. He stepped forward, pulling a length of rough hemp rope from his belt. "The Apache chief, Nantan. He has a taste for white women. He needs new blood in his tribe. He pays well in horses and silver. It is a business transaction. Miss Hartley, nothing personal." "You are a liar," Nell spat. She backed away, her hand fumbling for the knife she usually kept in her boot, but she was wearing the dress. She had no weapon. "The Apache do not buy women like cattle. That is a white man's sin." Barlow laughed. It was a dry, scratching sound. "What do you know of savages? Girl, you read too many dime novels." He lunged. Nell struck out with a closed fist, catching him on the jaw, but he was heavy and strong. He spun her around, wrenching her arms behind her back. The rough rope bit into her wrists. He tied them with practiced efficiency, the kind of knots used on calves at branding time. "Get her in the wagon," Barlow ordered Silas. Silas hesitated. He looked at his daughter, bound and struggling in the dust. He looked at the vast, indifferent sky. Then he looked at Barlow's pistol. "I'm sorry, Nell," Silas whispered. It is the only way." He helped Barlow lift her. They shoved her into the back of the wagon, onto the hard wooden planks. Silas climbed back onto the seat, his shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. Barlow mounted his black gelding and rode alongside them. "Drive," Barlow commanded. "The buyer is waiting." The wagon lurched forward. Nell lay on her side, the wood jarring her ribs with every rotation of the wheels. She did not cry. She watched her father's back. The man she had nursed through fevers, the man she had covered with a blanket when he passed out on the porch, the man she had loved despite his flaws, that man was dead. He had died the moment he signed that paper. The weather turned as they entered the throat of the canyon. The sky, previously a harsh blue, bruised into a deep, angry purple. The wind shifted, picking up sand from the valley floor and flinging it with the force of buckshot. It was a haboob, a wall of dust rolling in from the south. The light failed rapidly. The sun became a pale, sickly disk behind the veil of grit. The horses pinned their ears back, fighting the bit. Silas struggled with the reins, his courage dissolving with the visibility. "Keep them steady," Barlow shouted over the roar of the wind. He had tied a bandana over his nose and mouth. "We are nearly at the rim." Nell coughed, the dust coating her tongue. She curled her knees to her chest to keep from being thrown about as the wagon bounced violently over loose shale. The canyon walls rose up on either side, jagged teeth ready to close. High above them, watching from the concealment of a limestone ridge, Taza narrowed his eyes against the stinging sand. He lay flat on his stomach, his body pressed into the rock. Next to him lay Nokai, a younger scout who looked at the approaching wagon with suspicion. "Gun runners," Nokai signed with his hands, keeping his movements low. "Perhaps," Taza replied in their tongue. "That is Barlow. We know his face. He is a snake who sells sickness and calls it medicine." Taza's gaze shifted to the wagon. He saw the driver, a man radiating fear even from this distance. And he saw the cargo in the back. It was not crates of rifles. It was a woman. She was dressed in the clothes of the settlers, blue like the spirit stone, but she was bound like a captive. "They are bringing a prisoner," Taza murmured. "To whom?" Nokai asked. "To us," Taza realized, his jaw tightening. "They come to the meeting place Barlow requested. He told the elders he had gifts to offer for safe passage." "A woman is not a gift," Nokai said, offended. "She is a burden of war." "She is a trap," Taza corrected. "If we take her, The soldiers at Cedar Flats will say we stole her. They will use it as an excuse to hunt us down. Barlow wants to trade a human life for a war. Taza signaled to the others waiting in the crevices of the canyon wall. Be ready. Do not fire unless I fire. He slipped down the hidden trail, moving as fluidly as water over rock. He had to reach his father before the deal was struck. The wagon ground to a halt at the edge of the precipice. Here, the canyon floor dropped away into a dizzying abyss of red rock and shadow. The wind howled up from the deep, buffeting the wagon and making the horses scream in protest. Silas set the brake, his hands shaking so badly he nearly missed the lever. He climbed down, stumbling on his own feet. Barlow dismounted and walked to the back of the wagon. He grabbed Nell by the arm and hauled her out. She stumbled, her legs numb, but she forced herself to stand upright. The wind whipped her hair across her face, blinding her, but she refused to cower. Where are they? Silas shouted over the wind. There is no one here. They are here, Barlow said. From the swirling dust, figures emerged. They did not walk, they materialized. Chief Nantan rode a paint horse, sitting tall and unmoving. He held a lance decorated with eagle feathers, but his rifle was sheathed. Behind him rode 4 warriors. Taza was on foot, standing at the right hand of his father's horse, his rifle held loosely across his chest. Nell looked at them. She had heard stories in town, savages, devils, but looking at the lined, weary face of the old chief, she saw no devil. She saw a man who looked at her with a profound, sorrowful exhaustion. Barlow stepped forward, dragging Nell with him. He shoved her toward the Apache party. She stumbled, but caught her balance. Nantan, Barlow shouted. I brought the payment as agreed, a white woman, young, strong. She will bear strong sons. This clears the debt for the passage of my wagons through your land. Yes. Nell looked at Nantan. The old man's eyes flicked from her bound wrists to her defiant face, then to the shivering man by the wagon. Nantan spoke in Apache, his voice cutting through the wind. Taza stepped forward to translate, his English heavily accented but precise. My father says you are mistaken, Taza said, his eyes locked on Barlow. We did not ask for a woman. We asked for the return of the horses you stole last winter. Barlow's smile faltered, but only for a second. Come now. A trade is a trade. She is worth 10 horses. Look at her. We do not trade for flesh, Taza said coldly. That is the way of the Mexicans and the Americans. It is not our way. You bring her here to make us look like thieves. You want the cavalry to chase us so you can move your guns in the south without eyes watching you. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Nell looked at Barlow. He knew he had been caught in his lie. Take her, Barlow screamed, his hand flashing to the holster at his hip. Take her or I kill the lot of you. No, Silas yelled. Barlow fired. The shot was wild, aimed at the chief, but the wind took it. The bullet struck the stone near the feet of the wagon horses. Panic erupted. The team of horses, already terrified by the storm and the smell of fear, reared up. The leather traces snapped. The wagon lurched violently to the left, the back wheels sliding toward the crumbling edge of the canyon rim. Nell was knocked off her feet by the sudden movement of the horses. She fell hard, rolling toward the precipice. The ground beneath her was loose shale. It gave way. She scrambled, her boots finding no purchase, her bound hands useless to stop her slide. She went over the edge. Nell! Silas screamed. She fell, but she did not fall far. Her shoulder slammed into a protruding root of a twist pine growing out of the canyon wall. She gasped, the air leaving her lungs in a painful whoosh. She hung there, suspended over 300 feet of nothingness, her body dangling, held only by the friction of her body against the rock and the precarious root snagging her dress. Above her, the chaos intensified. Barlow was firing blindly into the dust. The Apache warriors had scattered, returning fire with disciplined precision. Silas cowered behind the wheel of the tilting wagon. Barlow grabbed him by the collar, using the older man as a human shield against the arrows and bullets whistling through the dust. Tell them, Barlow roared. jamming the barrel of his Colt into Silas's ear. "Tell them she is theirs. Tell them we made a deal, you coward." Silas looked over the edge. He saw his daughter clinging to the cliff face, her eyes wide with terror and accusation. He looked at the gun at his head. He looked at the death singing in the air around him. The terror broke him. It shattered whatever fragments of fatherhood remained in his soul. "I sold her!" Silas screamed. His voice was a wretched tearing sound that echoed off the canyon walls, louder than the gunshots. "I sold her. She is yours. Just let me go. I sold her." Nell closed her eyes. The wind roared, but she heard those words perfectly. I sold her. It was the final severance. The last thread connecting her to the name Hartley snapped. She was floating. She was nothing. She prepared to let go, to let the gravity take her, because there was no one in this world who wanted to catch her. Then, a hand grabbed her forearm. It was not the hand of a savior from a storybook. It was a hand rough with calluses, strong as ironwood, and warm. Nell looked up. Taza lay flat on the canyon rim, his body extended over the edge. He had dropped his rifle to reach her. His face was inches from the drop, his black hair whipping in the gale. His eyes were dark, intense, and utterly devoid of the greed she had seen in the men of her own race. "Hold on," he commanded. It was not a request. "He sold me," Nell whispered, the words tumbling out with the tears she could no longer hold back. "He sold me!" Taza tightened his grip. He pulled, his muscles strained, cords standing out on his neck. As he hauled her dead weight up against the force of gravity and despair, he dragged her over the lip of the cliff, away from the abyss, and pulled her onto the solid earth. He did not let go immediately. He lay there for a second, breathing hard, his hands still clamping her arm, ensuring she was not going to slide back. "He cannot sell you," Taza said. His voice was low, a rumble against the shrieking wind. He looked her in the eye, stripping away the title of daughter, of victim, of merchandise. "No one owns you. Do you hear me? No one owns you." Nell stared at him. The sand stung her cheeks, but she felt the heat of his hand on her skin. For the first time in her life, a man was holding her not to take something, but to keep her from falling. Across the clearing, the skirmish had ended as quickly as it began. Barlow, seeing he was outmatched and his plan ruined, had vaulted onto his horse and spurred it into the blinding dust, abandoning his human shield. Silas sat alone in the dirt. The wagon had tipped onto its side, the axle broken. He looked at Nell, his hands raised in a gesture of supplication. "Nell," he croaked. "Nell, I had to. The gun." Nell stood up. Taza stood with her. She reached into her boot, remembering she had no knife. But Taza saw the intent. He drew a knife from his belt and slashed the ropes binding her wrists. She rubbed the red, raw skin. She walked toward her father. She did not run. She did not scream. She walked with the cold finality of an executioner. Silas scrambled backward, crab-walking in the dirt. "Nell, baby, listen to me." She stopped 10 feet from him. She looked at the man who had taught her to ride, who had bought her the turquoise necklace, who had just screamed her price to the wind to save his own miserable skin. "You have no daughter," Nell said. The wind snatched the words and carried them away. "And I have no father." She turned her back on him. Chief Nantan rode forward. He looked down at the sobbing white man, then at the fleeing dust cloud where Barlow had vanished, and finally at the woman standing with his son. "The bluecoats will come," Nantan said to Taza. "They will hear the shots. If we leave her here, that worm," he gestured to Silas, "will tell them we stole her and killed him. He will lie to save himself again." "He will," Taza agreed. "And if she goes back to the town," Nantan continued, "the gun runner will find her. He will kill her because she knows his face and his crime." Nell looked at the chief. She understood enough. She was a loose end, a liability. "I can ride," Nell said clearly. She looked at Nantan. "And I can shoot. I am not a burden." Nantan studied her. He saw the fire in her, stoked by betrayal. He nodded once. It was a decision that would change the fate of his band, a decision that defied the wisdom of hiding. but honored the law of justice. "Put her on the spare horse," Nantan ordered. "We ride for the stronghold. The storm will cover our tracks." Taza brought a horse forward, a sturdy pinto with a rough blanket saddle. He offered his hand to boost her up. Nell hesitated for a fraction of a second. She looked at his hand, then at the vast, empty desert that was now her only home. She took his hand. "Ride close to me," Taza said as she swung into the saddle. "The path is narrow." "I am not afraid of the fall," Nell replied, her voice steady. She glanced one last time at the rim of the canyon. "I have already hit the bottom." They turned their horses into the teeth of the storm, leaving Silas Hartley alone with his life, his debt, and the echoing silence of his shame. The morning did not come with the heavy, suffocating silence of a prison cell. Nor did it bring the chaotic shrieking of the savage camp Eleanor Hartley had been warned about in the Sunday sermons of Cedar Flats. Instead, it arrived with the sound of running water and the low, rhythmic grinding of stone against corn. Nell opened her eyes. For a long, terrifying moment, she did not know where she was. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth, not the stale whiskey and dust of her father's cabin. Above her, sunlight filtered through a lattice of willow branches and hides a wickiup, constructed with a geometry that was both simple and sturdy. She sat up, gasping as the memory of the canyon rushed back to her. The wind, the cliff, the betrayal. "I sold her." The words still echoed in her skull, louder than the gentle bubbling of the nearby creek. She checked her wrists. They were raw and bruised where the ropes had been, but they were free. She touched her throat. The turquoise pendant was still there. She was alive. She was unbound. Tentatively, Nell crawled to the opening of the shelter and pushed aside the deer-hide flap. She braced herself for hostile glares, for guards, for chains. What she saw confused her. The camp was set in a narrow, verdant fold of the Dragoon Mountains, hidden from the desert floor below. It was a place of immense, disciplined order. Women were working near the stream, weaving baskets or preparing food with efficient, practiced movements. Men were tending to horses, not beating them into submission, but speaking to them in low tones. Children ran between the wickiups, but their play was quiet, mimicking the stalking games of hunters. No one rushed toward her. A few heads turned, eyes dark and appraising, but no one shouted. "You are awake!" Nell flinched and spun around. Taza was standing near a large oak tree, sharpening a knife on a whetstone. He had been there the whole time, blending so perfectly into the shadows of the leaves that she had looked right past him. He wore a clean cotton shirt today, though his leggings were the same buckskin from the canyon. "Where am I?" Nell asked. Her voice was rasping, her throat dry from the dust of the haboob. "A place where the water is sweet," Taza replied. He sheathed the knife and picked up a gourd dipper, filling it from an olla jar hanging from a branch. He walked toward her, stopping 5 feet away. He held out the water. Nell hesitated. The distance he kept was deliberate. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and lethal. She had seen him pull her from the abyss with one hand, but he stood with his hands visible, his posture relaxed. He was treating her like a spooked colt. She took the gourd. Her fingers brushed his, and she felt the calluses on his palm. She drank greedily, the cool water shocking her system back to life. "Am I a prisoner?" Nell wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She needed to know. She needed to define the parameters of her existence. "Do you see walls?" Taza asked, gesturing to the open canyon. "Do you see chains?" "I see a man with a knife watching my door," she countered, her spirit returning. A ghost of a smile touched Taza's lips, though it did not quite reach his eyes. "There are mountain lions in these hills, and rattlesnakes, and men worse than both. I watch the door so you can sleep, if you wish to leave. There is the trail. It leads back to the flats, back to the town." Nell looked at the trail winding down the canyon. Back to Cedar Flats, back to the whispers, back to a father who had traded her life for a crate of contraband rifles. "I cannot go back," she whispered. "Then you stay," Taza said simply. But know this, Eleanor Hartley here. You earn your keep. We carry no dead weight. If you eat, you work. If you stay, you survive." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the sunlight with the empty gourd and a terrifying, intoxicating amount of freedom. 40 miles to the east, in the smoky back room of the Last Dollar Saloon in Cedar Flats, the air was thick with malice. Barlow sat at a poker table, nursing a glass of bourbon. He looked immaculate, his suit brushed clean of the canyon dust, but his eyes were hard little marbles of rage. Opposite him sat a man who looked as if he had been carved from dried mesquite wood. Harlan Crow was a bounty hunter, though he preferred the term recovery agent. He wore a long duster coat that had seen 1,000 miles of bad road, and 2 heavy Remington revolvers hung low on his hips. He was eating a steak with his bare hands, tearing the meat with his teeth. "Let me get the story straight," Crow said, chewing slowly. "Silas Hartley, a known drunkard, tries to sell his own flesh and blood to the Apache. The deal goes sour. The girl falls. The Indian snatcher. They kidnapped her." Barlow corrected him smoothly. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "That is the official narrative. Mr. Crow, they attacked a peaceful wagon. They killed the horses. They dragged a screaming white woman into the hills to be their slave. And Silas is indisposed," Barlow said. "He is currently in the sheriff's custody, babbling about contraband and conspiracies. No one listens to a man who sold his daughter, but the town listens to fear. They are terrified. A white woman taken it plays to their nightmares." Crow wiped his grease-stained hand on his pants. "You don't care about the girl. You want the Apache." "Nantan and his band are sitting on a trade route I need," Barlow admitted, his voice dropping. "And the girl, she is a loose end. She saw things in that canyon. She saw the crates. If she talks to the army, to the federal marshals, my operation is compromised." Crow nodded. He understood. This was not a rescue mission. It was a cleanup operation. "I want her found," Barlow said, placing a heavy sack of coins on the table. "And I want Nantan's head. If the girl dies in the crossfire during the rescue, well, it is a tragedy of the frontier." Crow picked up the sack. It jingled with the heavy, satisfying sound of gold. "I can track a lizard across a flat rock at noon," Crow said. "I will find them, but bringing her back dead costs extra. Burials are heavy work." Barlow smiled, a thin, cruel expression. "Just get it done, Crow, before she opens her mouth." Days in the Apache camp fell into a rhythm that Nell found strangely comforting. It was a life stripped of pretense. There were no corsets, no social calls, no dodging the pitying looks of the town matrons. There was only the sun, the work, and the survival. She started by helping the women. At first, they watched her with open suspicion. To them, she was a White Eyes, a representative of the people who stole their land and killed their buffalo. But Nell did not complain. When she was given a pile of mesquite beans to grind, she ground them until her shoulders ached and her palms blistered. When she was asked to carry water, she made 10 trips without a word. Her breakthrough came on the 4th day. A young boy, no more than 8 years old, was trying to break a spirited colt near the stream. The horse bucked, throwing the boy hard into a pile of jagged river rocks. The boy screamed. Nell dropped the basket she was weaving and ran. She reached him before his mother did. The boy had a deep gash on his forearm, bleeding freely, and his wrist was bent at an odd angle. The mother, a woman named Ilth Koz, rushed forward, wailing. She reached for the boy, trying to pull him up. "No," Nell said firmly, holding up a hand. "Do not move him yet." Ilth Koz froze, surprised by the authority in the white woman's voice. Nell knelt in the dirt. She spoke softly to the boy, ignoring the circle of warriors that was forming around them. "Look at me," she said. "That is it. Breathe." She examined the arm. She had set bones before foals, calves, even her father's arm once when he fell off the porch. She tore a strip from her petticoat, soaking it in the cool water of the stream to wash the dirt from the gash. "This will hurt," Nell told the boy. But you are a warrior. Yes, warriors do not faint. With a quick, decisive movement, she set the wrist. The boy yelped, a sharp cry that cut off quickly as the pain subsided into a dull throb. Nell bound the arm tight with the wet cloth and fashioned a sling from her scarf. When she stood up, her hands bloody and shaking slightly from the adrenaline, she found herself face to face with Chief Nantan. The old man looked at the bandaged arm, then at Nell. His expression was unreadable, ancient and heavy. "You have the hands of a healer," Nantan said in English. "I have the hands of a rancher's daughter," Nell replied, wiping the blood on her skirt. "We fix what is broken, because no one else will do it for us." Nantan nodded slowly. "You are useful. That is good, but utility does not guarantee safety." Later that evening, Taza found her sitting by the fire, mending a leather stirrup strap. He sat down across from her, feeding a piece of ironwood into the flames. "My father is worried," Taza said quietly. "About the boy." "About you," Taza corrected. "You are a political fuse. Nell, if we keep you, the town says we kidnapped you. If we send you back, the gun runner kills you to silence you. You are dangerous to us." Nell stopped sewing. The needle hovered over the leather. "I did not ask to be this burden." "No," Taza agreed. "But the rain does not ask to be a flood. It just is." He watched her work for a moment. Her stitches were neat, tight, and strong. "You work leather well, better than some of our men." "My father," Nell started, then stopped. The word tasted like ash. "Silas taught me. He said leather was honest, unlike people." "He was right about the leather," Taza said. He picked up a stick and drew a shape in the dirt, a winding line. "I was a translator once, for the army, at Fort Apache." Nell looked up, surprised. "You worked for the soldiers. I thought if I learned their words, I could stop the fighting," Taza said. His voice tinged with a bitterness that had aged well. "I thought if they understood us, they would not hate us. But I learned that words are just wind. The soldiers used my words to trick the elders. They signed treaties with ink that faded before it dried. They used confusion to start wars." He looked at Nell, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "That is why I hate the gun. It is an honest tool of death, but it is used by liars. But I will use it if I must. To protect this." He gestured to the camp, to the sleeping children, to the peace of the canyon. "I believe the lies too," Nell admitted softly. "In town, they said you were monsters. They said you killed for sport." She looked around the quiet camp. "I was the fool. The savagery was not out here. It was in the carriage with me. It was my own father. We are all savages when we are cornered," Taza said. "The difference is who we eat when the hunger comes. The wolf eats the deer. The white man eats his own." He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small leather bag, no bigger than a coin purse. He tossed it to her. Nell caught it. It was heavy. She opened the drawstring and poured a little of the contents into her palm. It was red sand, fine, glittering, the color of dried blood and sunset. "What is this?" she asked. "Earth from the place of my birth," Taza said. "It is red because it remembers the sun. It does not blow away in the wind like the dust of the flats. It is heavy." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "You are floating. Nell, your father cut your string. You feel like you are drifting. Keep that sand. It will remind you that you have weight. Do not let anyone drag you off your own ground again." Nell closed her hand over the sand. It felt warm. "Ground yourself." "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," Taza said. Standing up, he looked toward the ridge, where the sentries were posted. "The wind is changing." The peace broke 2 days later. It began with the arrival of Nokai, the young scout who had been with Taza at the canyon. He rode his horse into camp hard, the animal lathered and blowing. He slid from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped and ran to Nantan's wickiup. Taza was there in seconds. Nell dropped the water jug she was carrying and followed, stopping at a respectful distance, her heart hammering against her ribs. Nokai spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing wildly toward the north. Nell couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Urgency, threat, approaching. Taza turned to look at her. His face was a mask of grim resolve. He walked over to where she stood. "What is it?" Nell asked. "Is it Barlow?" "Barlow has been busy," Taza said. "He has hired a man, Harlan Crow, a hunter of men, and he has stirred the hive. A posse is forming in Cedar Flats. 50 men, and a detachment of cavalry from the fort." 50 men, Nell paled. "For one woman." "Not for one woman," Taza said harshly. "For an excuse. Barlow has told them we have you. He says we are torturing you. He has whipped the town into a frenzy. They come not to rescue you, Nell. They come to wipe us out." Nell felt the sickness rise in her throat. It was happening again. She was the currency. She was the excuse. Her existence was going to get these people the boy she healed. The women who taught her to weave killed. "I have to go back," Nell said. "If I go out to them, if I show them I am alive and well, Crow will shoot you before you speak," Taza said. "Or Barlow will. You are a dead woman walking if you approach that posse. Then what do we do?" "We move," Taza said. "We go deep into the Dragoon stronghold, where the wagons cannot follow, where the horses break their legs. We turn the land against them. They will follow," Nell said. "Crow will track us." "Let him track," Taza said, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt. "He tracks a ghost, but if he catches us—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The sound of a distant bugle drifted on the wind, thin and metallic. The cavalry was coming. "Pack your things," Taza ordered. "We ride in 10 minutes. Nell ran to her shelter. She grabbed the few items she'd had: the turquoise necklace, the canteen, and the small bag of red sand. She shoved them into her pocket. She felt the weight of the sand against her hip. Do not let anyone drag you off your own ground. She was not going to run forever. She was done being the victim in Barlow's story. As she emerged into the chaotic activity of the camp being struck, Eleanor Hartley made a choice. She would ride with the Apache. She would survive. And when the time was right, she would stop running and start fighting back. The dust cloud on the horizon grew larger, a brown smudge staining the perfect blue of the sky. The storm was no longer nature. It was men, and it was coming for her. "We are running blind," Nell said, her voice cutting through the frenetic activity of the camp breakdown. She stood before Chief Nantan and Taza, the bag of red sand clutching at her hip like a stone. "If we go deeper into the mountains, we just delay the inevitable. Barlow will bring the army. He will tell them you massacred a white woman, and the cavalry will burn every wickiup they find until I am produced." Nantan looked at her, his face grim. "And if we produce you, if you walk out to them now?" "Crow will shoot me before I can speak," Nell replied. "Or Barlow will claim I am hysterical, mad from my captivity. My word against theirs is dust in the wind." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I need paper. I need proof." Taza stopped tying a bundle of hides to a travois. He turned to her. "What proof?" "Barlow keeps a ledger," Nell said. "I saw it that night at the cabin. He writes down everything. Every debt, every shipment, every bribe. He is arrogant, but he is a businessman. He would never destroy his leverage." She looked toward the east, where the haze of Cedar Flats stained the horizon. "It will be in his room at the hotel, or at the livery office he uses. If I can get that book, I can show the colonel at the fort that Barlow is a gun runner. The army hangs smugglers. Nantan. They do not do business with them." "It is suicide," Taza said flatly. "The town is swarming with men who want to kill us." "They are looking for Apache warriors in the hills," Nell countered. "They are not looking for a woman slipping into the back of the saloon." She looked Taza in the eye. "I know the town. I know the alleys. I can do this." Nantan was silent for a long moment. He looked at the woman who had set a broken bone without flinching. "It is a desperate path." "We are in desperate times," Nell said. Taza stepped forward. "She cannot go alone. She will need a shadow." "I do not need a babysitter." Nell bristled. "You do not need a babysitter." Taza agreed, his voice low. "You need a gun. And you need someone who can move silently when the floorboards creak. I will take you." Nantan nodded. Go, but be swift like the hawk. If the sun rises and you are still in that town, you will not leave it alive. Cedar Flats was a different beast at night. By day, it was a scrubby collection of false-fronted buildings bleaching in the sun. Under the moon, it was a labyrinth of sharp shadows and yellow lamplight spilling from the saloons. Nell and Taza left their horses a mile out, tethered in a dry wash. They approached on foot, moving through the back lots where the trash was burned and the stray dogs slept. Taza moved with an unnerving silence. Nell tried to match him, picking her way over broken crates and empty bottles. They crouched behind a stack of barrels outside the general store. The main street was loud. The Last Dollar Saloon was roaring with noise piano music, shouting, the clatter of glass. Barlow stays at the hotel across the street, Nell whispered. Room 204. It faces the street. Wait, Taza signaled with his hand. Listen. Voices drifted from the open window of the sheriff's office nearby. Nell froze. She recognized the boom of Sheriff Miller and the shrill, pious tone of Pastor Thomas. It is a tragedy, Sheriff, the pastor was saying. But we must be realistic. The girl has been with the savages for nearly a week. A week! I know, Pastor, Miller sighed. It is a damn shame. She is soiled, the pastor continued, his voice dripping with a sickly kind of concern. Ruined. Even if we get her back, what place does she have here? No decent man will look at her. She is tainted goods. Miller, it would almost be a mercy if she didn't come back, Miller finished the thought. Careful, Pastor, that sounds unchristian. I speak only of the purity of the soul, the pastor insisted. Better to be with the Lord than to live as the concubine of a heathen. Nell felt a coldness spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the night air. She pressed her back against the rough wood of the barrels. They were not planning a rescue. They were planning a funeral. To them. She wasn't a woman who had been kidnapped. She was a vessel that had been broken, a stain on the town's morality that needed to be scrubbed out. You hear them? Taza whispered. His face was close to hers in the dark. They do not worry for your life. They worry for your virtue. Let them talk, Nell said, though her voice shook. I do not care about their virtue. I care about my life. She pushed past the hurt. Focus, she told herself. Get the book. The hotel is too exposed. Nell noted. But Barlow does his business at the livery stable office. He meets the drivers there. The ledger might be in the safe. They moved through the shadows. Skirting the edge of the light, they reached the livery stable at the end of the street. It was dark, the heavy doors closed. The smell of hay and manure was thick. Taza checked the side door. Locked. He produced a thin strip of metal from his belt and worked the latch. It clicked open in seconds. Inside, the stable was dim, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the cracks in the roof. Horses shifted in their stalls, snorting at the scent of the Apache, but Taza made a low, soothing sound in his throat, and the animals settled. The office was a small room at the back. Nell pushed the door open. A kerosene lamp sat on the desk, unlit. She didn't dare light it. She fumbled in the dark, her hands sweeping over the desk. Papers, a whiskey bottle, a box of cigars. The safe, she whispered. It was in the corner, a heavy iron box. It was locked. I cannot open this, Taza said, looking at the dial. I track deer, not tumblers. Nell knelt before it. I can. My father had one just like it. He never changed the factory setting because he could not remember the numbers. She pressed her ear against the cold metal. She spun the dial. Left to 4, right to 2, left to 6. Click. The handle turned. Nell let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She pulled the heavy door open. Inside, there was a stack of cash $2,000, easily, and a thick, leather-bound book. Nell grabbed the book. She ignored the money. She opened the ledger, tilting it toward a sliver of moonlight. Her finger traced the entries. June 4th, 12 Henry rifles. Delivered to South Canyon. July 10th, 5 crates ammunition. Received from Barlow Transport, August 1st. Payment to Sheriff Miller, $50. Silence fee. I have it, Nell whispered, clutching the book to her chest. It is all here. The bribes, the guns. Touching, a voice said from the doorway. Nell spun around. Taza moved instantly, stepping in front of her, his knife drawn. Harlan Crow stood in the entrance of the office. He held a shotgun, the twin barrels leveled at Taza's chest. Behind him, blocked from view by the bounty hunter's bulk, was the silhouette of another man. "Drop the knife, boy," Crow said pleasantly, "or I cut you in half and let the girl pick up the pieces." Taza did not drop the knife. His muscles were coiled, ready to spring. "Do it," Crow warned, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I get paid dead or alive. It makes no difference to me." Taza slowly lowered the knife, placing it on the floor. He kicked it away. "Smart Indian," Crow said. He stepped into the room, keeping the gun trained on them. Barlow stepped in behind him. The businessman looked tired, his suit dusty. "Miss Hartley," Barlow said, shaking his head, "you are a persistent nuisance. I thought you would be halfway to Mexico by now." "You are a traitor," Nell said, holding up the ledger. "I have proof. The Army will see this." "The Army will see what I show them," Barlow said. He walked over and snatched the book from her hands. He tossed it onto the desk. "And they will see a tragedy. A woman, driven mad by her captors, killed during a rescue attempt, and her savage kidnapper, shot down while using her as a shield. My father will tell them," Nell said, grasping at a straw she knew was broken. "He knows everything," Barlow laughed. It was a genuine, amused sound. "Your father Silas," Barlow leaned against the doorframe. "You really don't know, do you? You think Silas just owed me money for whiskey?" "He owed you for the guns," Nell said. "He owed me for the guns, yes," Barlow agreed. "But Silas didn't just sell you to clear the debt. Eleanor, he sold something far more valuable to get you off his hands." Barlow gestured to the map pinned to the wall of the office. It was a map of the territory, marked with red ink. "The Apache moved through the secret water holes," Barlow said. "The hidden springs in the Dragoons. The Army has never found them. That is why they can never catch Nantan. But Silas knew them. He used to hunt Mustang up there." Nell felt the blood drain from her face. "No. Oh, yes," Crow chimed in, grinning. "Old Silas drew us a very pretty map. In exchange for his freedom and a bottle of gin, he gave us the location of every secret spring your new friends use. We aren't just going to catch Nantan, little lady. We are going to wait at the water. We are going to slaughter them like thirst-crazed cattle." Nell looked at Taza. He stood perfectly still, but his eyes were burning with a cold, terrifying light. Her father hadn't just betrayed her. He had betrayed an entire people. He had sold their survival for a drink. "He is a monster," Nell whispered. "He is a survivor," Barlow said. "Like me. Now, Crow, tie them up. We will hand them over to the sheriff in the morning. It will be a fine hanging." Crow stepped forward, lowering the shotgun slightly to reach for a pair of irons at his belt. It was the only mistake he made. Taza didn't lunge for Crow. He lunged for the kerosene lamp on the desk. With a backhand swipe, Taza smashed the lamp against the wall. Glass shattered. Oil sprayed across the dry wooden planks and the stack of hay in the corner. The flame caught instantly. Whoosh! Fire erupted, a wall of orange heat separating Nell and Taza from the two men. The horses in the main stable screamed as the smell of smoke hit them. "Shoot him!" Barlow screamed, shielding his face. Crow fired. Boom! The buckshot tore into the wooden desk, sending splinters flying, but Taza had already tackled Nell, driving her to the floor. "Move!" Taza shouted. They scrambled on hands and knees through the smoke. Taza kicked open a loose board at the back of the office, a bolt hole used by stable hands to sneak in after curfew. He shoved Nell through it. She tumbled out into the alleyway, coughing. Taza followed a second later, just as another blast from the shotgun blew the office door off its hinges. "Fire!" someone shouted in the street. "Fire at the livery!" The church bell began to clang, a frantic, rhythmic peal. Clang, clang, clang. It wasn't a call to prayer. It was the alarm. "This way!" Taza commanded. He grabbed Nell's hand. They ran. They sprinted through the labyrinth of back alleys, leaping over puddles of slop and ducking under clotheslines. Behind them, the glow of the fire painted the night sky orange. Shouts of men and the pounding of boots on the boardwalks echoed all around them. "There, by the blacksmith!" a voice yelled. A bullet whined past Nell's ear and struck a water barrel, spraying her with liquid. "Faster!" Taza urged. They turned a corner and found themselves dead-ended against a high wooden fence. The heavy footsteps of the pursuit were closing in. Taza didn't hesitate. He laced his fingers together. "Up!" Nell stepped into his hands. He launched her upward. She caught the top of the fence and hauled herself over, dropping into the soft hay of a private corral on the other side. Taza vaulted the fence a second later, landing silently beside her. They were in the shadows of a small barn behind the doctor's house. It was quiet here, the noise of the fire and the mob distant but growing. Nell leaned against the wall of the barn, sliding down until she hit the dirt. Her chest was heaving. Her lungs burned. She looked at her hand. It was bleeding a long, jagged cut across her palm where she had scraped it on the fence. Taza knelt beside her. He was breathing hard too, sweat glistening on his forehead. He looked at the fire rising in the distance. Then at her. "We lost the book," Nell gasped. "We lost the proof. We have our lives," Taza said. He saw the blood on her hand. "Let me see." He took her hand gently. The adrenaline was fading, leaving Nell shaking violently. The realization of her father's second betrayal hit her harder than the physical danger. He had doomed them all. The springs, the water, the women and children she had left behind were walking into a trap. "He sold the water," Nell sobbed, the tears finally breaking through. "He sold the water. Taza, how could he?" Taza didn't answer immediately. He unwound the scarf from his neck. It was rough cotton, smelling of sage and smoke. He carefully wiped the blood from her palm. His touch was incredibly tender, a stark contrast to the violence of the last 10 minutes. "A man who sells his own blood will sell anything," Taza said quietly. He wrapped the scarf around her hand, binding it firmly. "Do not weep for him. Nell, he is a hollow man. The wind blows through him and makes no sound." Nell looked up at him. His face was inches from hers in the dark. He wasn't looking at her as a liability, or a white woman, or a political pawn. He was looking at her with a fierce, protective intensity that made her breath catch. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am sorry I brought this to your door. I am just a debt to be paid. That is all I have ever been." Taza stopped, his hand stilled on her bandage. He looked deep into her eyes, searching for the strength he knew was there. "No," he said firmly. "You are the woman who rode into the storm. You are the woman who set the boy's arm. You are the woman who walked into the wolf's den to save my people." He leaned closer, his forehead resting momentarily against hers. It was not a kiss. It was something more primal, a sharing of breath, of shared survival. "You are not a debt, Eleanor," he whispered, using her full name. "You are not a coin to be spent. You are free, and as long as I draw breath, no one will put a price on you again." Nell closed her eyes, leaning into his strength. For a moment, the burning town, the shouting mob, and the treacherous father ceased to exist. There was only the smell of sage, the warmth of his skin, and the steady beat of his heart. But the moment could not last. Outside, the shouting grew louder. The sheriff's voice boomed over the crowd. "They are cornered. Crow says they are in the North Quarter. Rally the men, every able-bodied man with a rifle. We finish this tonight." Taza pulled back. The tenderness vanished, replaced by the warrior's alert tension. "The hive is kicked," Taza said. "We must go. Now." "Where?" Nell asked, struggling to her feet. "They know the springs. We cannot go back to the stronghold." "No," Taza said. "We cannot go back. We must go forward. Into the storm." He moved to the barn door and cracked it open. The sky was lit with the red glare of the burning livery. Through the gap, Nell saw Harlan Crow mounting a massive bay horse. He was shouting orders to a group of soldiers who had just arrived from the fort. "Mount up," Crow roared. "We have the map. We cut them off at the Painted Rock. No quarter kill the bucks. Take the women." The soldiers cheered, a ragged, bloodthirsty sound. Nell gripped Taza's arm. "They are going to the Painted Rock. That is where Nantan is heading." "Then we must beat them there," Taza said grimly. "We must ride until the horses die, and then run until our hearts burst." He looked at her one last time. "Are you ready, Nell?" Nell touched the bandage on her hand. She touched the turquoise at her throat. She thought of her father, drinking his gin, safe in his betrayal. And she thought of the boy with the broken arm, waiting by the spring. "I am ready," she said. They slipped out of the barn and into the night, two shadows racing against an army, with the sound of church bells ringing like a funeral dirge behind them. The sun rose over the Painted Rock like a blade pulled from a sheath, cold, sharp, and unforgiving. The light bled across the desert floor, illuminating the jagged formations of the Dragoon Mountains, where Chief Nantan and his people had taken refuge near the hidden spring. They had arrived only an hour before the dawn, horses trembling with exhaustion. Nell and Taza had ridden hard, their mounts blowing foam. To beat the posse to the stronghold, they had succeeded, but only by the grace of a few precious minutes. Now, the enemy was here. Nell stood next to Taza on a ridge of sandstone. Below them, the narrow box canyon that served as the entrance to the spring was filling with dust. Through the haze, the shapes of men and horses emerged. There were soldiers in dusty blue uniforms, their sabers glinting. There were men from Cedar Flats shopkeepers and ranchers armed with hunting rifles, faces twisted with a mix of fear and righteous anger. And at the front, riding a massive bay gelding, was Harlan Crow. Beside him rode Barlow, looking immaculate and out of place in his city suit, and slumped in the saddle next to him was Silas Hartley. "They are too many," Taza said quietly. He checked the load in his Winchester. "If they charge the canyon, we can hold them for a time. But the soldiers have a mountain gun. They won't use the cannon," Nell said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. She pressed her hand against her bodice, feeling the crinkle of the papers she had managed to snatch from the desk in the smoke-blinded chaos of the livery stable, a desperate, instinctive theft she hadn't even mentioned to Taza until they stopped to water the horses. It was not the whole ledger, but it was enough the bill of sale and the map her father had drawn. "Not if they think I am down there. Barlow needs me dead, but he needs the army to think it was an accident." Chief Nantan rode up to them. He looked at the gathered force, then at Nell. "This is the end of the running," the old chief said. "I will go down. I will speak to the blue-coat leader. Perhaps he has ears that are not filled with wax." "I will go with you," Nell said. "No," Taza cut in sharply. "You stay under cover. Crow will shoot you the moment he sees you. If I hide, I am the victim they claim I am," Nell countered. Turning to him, her eyes were fierce, the gold flecks in the iris burning. "If I stand beside you, I am a witness. I am the proof that Barlow is a liar." Taza looked at her. He saw the resolve in her set jaw, the same strength that had pulled him from his own despair days ago. He nodded once. "Stay close to my shoulder," he said. The confrontation took place on the flat hardpan at the mouth of the canyon. The wind whipped the dust into devils that danced between the two lines of men. On one side, the Apache warriors sat on their ponies, silent and still as statues. On the other, the posse shifted nervously, fingers hovering over triggers. Barlow rode forward, flanked by Crow and the terrified Silas, a military officer. A lieutenant with a handlebar mustache and tired eyes rode with them. "Nantan," Barlow shouted, his voice carrying over the wind. "We have come for the woman. Surrender her now, and the army might show you mercy. Refuse, and we will wash this canyon with your blood." Nantan nudged his horse forward. "The woman is not a captive. Gun runner. She is here by her own choice. She seeks refuge from the wolves of her own pack." "Lies," Pastor Thomas shouted from the back of the posse. "She is bewildered. Sorcery. Bring out the girl." "Bring her out," the mob echoed. Taza kicked his horse forward, emerging from the shadow of the canyon wall. Nell rode beside him. She sat tall in the saddle, wearing the buckskin shirt Ilthkos had given her, her hair braided in the Apache style. The sight of her sent a ripple of shock through the men of Cedar Flats. "I'm here," Nell called out. Her voice was clear, ringing like a bell in the tense silence. "I am Eleanor Hartley, and I am no captive." The lieutenant frowned, raising a hand to silence the murmuring crowd. "Miss Hartley, are you unharmed?" "She is brainwashed." Lieutenant Barlow interjected quickly, his horse dancing sideways. "Look at her dressed like a savage. They have broken her mind. We must attack now, before they kill her." "I am not broken," Nell shouted. She pulled the folded papers from her shirt. "I have evidence. Lieutenant, this man, Barlow, is a smuggler. He sells rifles to the border gangs, and he tried to buy me from my father to cover his debts." She held the papers high. The wind caught them, fluttering the edges. "That is absurd," Barlow scoffed, though his face had gone pale. "That is ramblings written by a drunkard." He turned to Silas, grabbing the older man by the collar of his coat. "Tell them, Silas, tell them the truth. Tell them how these savages stole your daughter." Silas Hartley looked at the crowd. He looked at the lieutenant, who was watching him with narrowing eyes. Then he looked at Nell. She was 20 yards away. She looked like a stranger, forged in fire and dust, but her eyes, those were the eyes of the little girl who used to sit on his knee while he read the Bible. "Pa," Nell said softly, though the wind carried the word. "Tell the truth. For once in your life. Be a father." Silas began to shake. The pressure was immense. Barlow's hand was digging into his shoulder, a silent promise of death. Crow was watching him with a reptilian stare. The town was watching. Silas stammered. "Tell them," Barlow hissed, jamming the barrel of a hidden derringer into Silas's ribs. The pain, the fear, and the crushing weight of his own guilt finally broke the dam. Silas threw his head back and screamed, a sound of pure, ragged agony. "I sold her!" The shout echoed off the canyon walls, shocking the crowd into silence. "I sold her!" Silas shrieked again, tears streaming down his dusty face. "I sold her to Barlow. He wanted a trade. I signed the paper. I sold my own girl for a crate of guns and a cleared debt. I sold her." The confession hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. The men of Cedar Flats looked at one another, the narrative of the innocent victim shattered. Barlow's face twisted into a mask of pure fury. The game was up. He knew it. "Shut up, you old fool!" Barlow roared. He raised the derringer, not at Silas, but at Nell. Kill them all!" He fired. The shot was wild, missing Nell but striking the rock near her horse's hooves. "Fire!" Crow yelled, raising his heavy buffalo rifle. But before Crow could pull the trigger, before the lieutenant could shout an order, Taza moved. He did not fire his weapon. He did not seek cover. He spurred his horse forward, placing himself directly in the line of fire, between Nell and the posse. He was a singular figure of defiance. His chest offered to the guns to shield the woman behind him. He raised his rifle, not to kill, but to command. "No one owns her!" Taza's voice roared, deeper and more powerful than the thunder of the coming storm. He glared at Silas, at Barlow, at the entire town. "She is not cattle. She is not silver. She belongs to herself." It was the moment that would be etched into the history of the territory. The son of the chief, standing as the shield for the daughter of the drunkard. His son became her greatest protector, for a heartbeat. The sheer audacity of his act held the gun silent. Then, chaos broke. Crow fired. The heavy slug caught Taza's horse in the shoulder. The animal screamed and went down, throwing Taza to the hard pan. "Taza!" Nell screamed. She didn't freeze. She didn't faint. She drew the Colt revolver Taza had given her and fired a shot into the air, causing the posse's horses to rear in panic. "Get to the rocks!" Nantan shouted, his warriors laying down a suppressing fire to cover Taza. Taza scrambled to his feet, dust covering his face. He grabbed Nell's bridle. "Go up the trail. The lieutenant needs the papers." "I am not leaving you." "Ride." Taza slapped her horse's flank hard. Nell's horse bolted toward the narrow path leading up the canyon wall. Taza vaulted onto a loose pony held by a young brave and galloped after her. The battle dissolved into a running skirmish. The soldiers, confused by the confession and the chaos, held their fire, but Crow and his hired gunsmen, loyal only to Barlow's gold, surged forward. They chased Nell and Taza into the throat of the canyon. The walls rose high and red around them. Bullets whined off the stone, sending deadly splinters flying, cut them off at the ridge. Crow shouted, spurring his bay horse up a goat trail to flank them. Nell rode low over the neck of her pinto. She could hear the heavy breathing of Taza's pony behind her. They were climbing fast, the trail narrowing to a dangerous ledge. Ahead, the trail opened into a small plateau where the lieutenant had positioned a squad of soldiers to prevent an ambush. This was it. The only chance. Nell burst onto the plateau. The soldiers raised their carbines. Startled, "Hold fire!" Nell screamed, pulling her horse to a sliding stop. She threw the papers onto the ground at the feet of the lieutenant's sergeant. Read the bill of sale." The sergeant hesitated, then picked up the paper. He looked at it, his eyes widening. Behind her, Taza rode onto the plateau, spinning his pony to face the pursuit. Crow crested the ridge a second later, his face bloody from a branch whip, his eyes manic. "Drop the guns!" Crow yelled. Ignoring the soldiers, he leveled his rifle at Nell. "She dies." "Crow, stand down," the sergeant ordered, stepping forward. "We have the paper. It is over." "It isn't over until I get paid," Crow snarled. He swung the rifle toward Nell. Taza didn't have his rifle. He had lost it in the fall. He had only his knife and his body. He launched himself from the back of his pony, tackling Crow out of the saddle just as the gun went off. The bullet went wide, shattering a rock near Nell's head. Taza and Crow hit the ground in a tangle of limbs and dust. Crow was bigger, heavier, a brute of a man who fought with the strength of a bear. He slammed a fist into Taza's face, dazing him. Crow reached for the bowie knife at his belt. "I will skin you, boy." Crow grunted, raising the knife. Nell saw Taza's eyes roll back momentarily. He was stunned. Crow's knife descended. Bang! Crow jerked. The knife fell from his hand. He looked down at his shoulder, where a blossom of red was spreading. He looked up. Nell sat on her horse, the Colt smoking in her hand. Her face was pale, but her hand was rock steady. She had shot him, not to kill, but to stop him. "I said," Nell spoke, her voice cold and hard as the canyon stone. "No one owns me, and no one touches him." Crow roared in pain and rage, lunging for his fallen gun with his good arm. Taza shook off the daze. He saw the movement. He swept Crow's legs out from under him, pinned him to the dirt, and pressed his own knife against the bounty hunter's throat. "Enough," Taza hissed. "The blood stops here." Silence fell over the plateau. The wind howled through the rocks, but the gunfire had ceased. Below, in the valley, the lieutenant had ridden up to Barlow, who was trying to reload his pistol. Soldiers surrounded the businessman, their carbines trained on his chest. The confession of Silas Hartley had done its work. Nantan rode up the trail, followed by his warriors. He stopped near Taza and Nell. He looked at Crow, bleeding in the dirt, and then at his son. "Is he dead?" Nantan asked. "He lives," Taza said, rising and sheathing his knife. He wiped the blood from his lip. "We are not butchers." Nell holstered her gun. Her hands began to shake now that the danger had passed. She slid from her horse, her knees buckling. Taza was there instantly. He caught her before she hit the ground. He held her upright, his arm around her waist, strong and unyielding. "You shot him," Taza said, a note of awe in his voice. "I missed his head," Nell said shakily. "I was aiming for his ear." Taza laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, breathless with relief. "Remind me never to make you angry. Eleanor Hartley." The lieutenant rode up the trail, looking grim. He held the bill of sale in his hand. He looked at Silas, who was weeping openly now, sitting on a rock with his head in his hands. "Miss Hartley," the lieutenant said, "this document, it confirms everything you said. And with your father's confession, Barlow is under arrest for smuggling and for conspiracy to commit murder. He looked at Taza and Nantan. My orders were to bring in hostiles, but it seems the only hostiles here are the ones who hired me. We will return to our stronghold, Nantan said firmly. We have broken no treaty. We defended our own. The lieutenant nodded slowly. I will report that the Apache acted in self-defense, but Barlow has friends in Washington. This isn't over. It is over for today, Taza said. He looked at Nell. And that is enough. The sun was fully up now, bathing the canyon in a harsh, revealing light. The lies had been burned away. Silas Hartley sat alone, a broken man who had lost his daughter forever. Barlow was in chains. Crow was groaning in the dirt and standing together, covered in dust and blood. Nell and Taza looked at each other. They were battered. They were exhausted, but they were standing on their own ground. The storm had broken. But the rebuilding was just beginning. The dust from the confrontation at the Painted Rock did not settle. It was merely carried away by the wind, leaving the landscape scarred and the silence heavy. The victory, if it could be called that, tasted of ash. There was no celebration in the Apache camp. There was only the urgent, disciplined haste of a people who knew that a reprieve was not a pardon. Nantan gave the order to move before the sun had reached its zenith. The location of the secret spring was no longer a secret. Silas Hartley had sold it, and even though the soldiers had retreated, the knowledge was out there, written on a map that Barlow had likely duplicated. The heart of the stronghold was compromised. Nell rode in the center of the column. She did not look back at the canyon where the guns had roared. She looked at her hands, resting on the pommel of her saddle. They were steady, but inside, she felt as though she had been hollowed out with a carving knife. The physical danger had passed, but the internal wound was bleeding freely. I sold her. The words were not just a memory. They were a physical weight in her chest, heavier than the turquoise stone she wore. Her father had not just failed her. He had commodified her. He had looked at her 26 years of life, her laughter, her labor, her loyalty, and decided it was worth exactly 12 crates of rifles and a cleared tab at the saloon. Taza rode beside her. He did not speak. He did not offer platitudes. He understood that grief was a landscape that had to be crossed alone, step by painful step. He simply rode close enough that his stirrup occasionally brushed against hers, a silent reminder that she was not falling into the abyss. They made camp 3 days later in a high, jagged spine of the mountains, far from the waterholes known to the white men. It was a harsh place, cold at night and exposed to the wind, but it was safe. News traveled up the mountain on the lips of scouts. The report was grim but final. Barlow was in irons, being transported to the federal prison in Yuma, and Silas was with him. The charge was smuggling and conspiracy. But for Silas, the true sentence was the bottle. Without Nell to steady him, without the ranch to hide him, he would likely be dead within the year, consumed by the demons he had tried to sell his daughter to appease. Nell sat by the small fire outside her temporary shelter. Nantan approached her. The old chief looked weary. The flight had taken a toll on his joints, but his eyes remained sharp. The scouts say your father did not look back when they put him in the wagon, Nantan said. He did not sugarcoat the truth. He never looked back, Nell replied, her voice dry. He was always looking for the next deal, the next escape. You have a choice, Eleanor, Nantan said. He used her full name, giving it a weight of respect. The soldiers are gone. The pass to the south is open. If you wish to go to Santa Fe or to Tucson, I will send 2 warriors to guide you. You are not a captive here. You never were. Nell looked at the fire. If I go to the cities, I am the woman whose father sold her to the Indians. That is the only name I will have. And if you stay, Nantan asked. If I stay, Nell looked up, her gaze drifting across the camp to where Taza was grooming his horse. If I stay, I am just Nell. I am the woman who knows how to set a bone and mend a saddle. Then stay, Nantan said. but not because you have nowhere to go. Stay because you choose to be here. A bird that stays in the cage when the door is open is not a guest. It is a prisoner of its own fear. Do not fear the world. Nell, conquer it." He left her with that thought. Nell watched him go. She realized then that these people, whom her father had called savages, offered her the one thing civilization never had, the dignity of autonomy. The conflict with the society of Cedar Flats was not over. It had merely changed shape. The guns were silent, but the mouths were not. A week later, a trader who exchanged goods with the Apache brought newspapers from the town. He was a Mexican man named Ramirez, who played both sides of the border with a careful neutrality. He handed a folded paper to Taza, who brought it to Nell. "Read," Taza said, his face dark. Nell unfolded the Cedar Flats Gazette. The headline screamed in bold, black ink, "Hartley girl brainwashed by savages. Stockholm Syndrome suspected. Good Christian women pray for her soul." The article was a masterpiece of fiction. It claimed Nell had been drugged, tortured into compliance, and that her defense of Taza at the canyon was the result of heathen mesmerism. It painted Barlow as a tragic businessman caught in a misunderstanding and Silas as a grieving father manipulated by circumstances. "They cannot stand the truth," Nell said, crumpling the paper. "They cannot admit that a white woman found more honor in an Apache camp than in their church pews. They are dangerous," Taza warned. "Ramirez says there are men in the saloons drinking to your name. They say you have shamed the race. They talk of rescuing you to save your soul, even if they have to kill your body to do it." Nell stood up. The anger that flared in her was not the hot, blinding rage of the canyon. It was cold and precise. "Do you have paper?" Nell asked. "And ink." "Ramirez has supplies," Taza said. "Get them." That afternoon, Nell sat on a flat rock and wrote. She did not write a letter. She wrote a sworn affidavit. She detailed the dates of the shipments she had seen in the ledger. She described the bill of sale word for word. She recounted the conversation where Pastor Thomas had worried more about her virtue than her life. She named names: Sheriff Miller, the shopkeepers who turned a blind eye, the good Christians who spat on the Apache. She wrote with the clarity of a woman who had nothing left to lose. When she was finished, she folded the document and sealed it with wax melted from a candle. She handed it to Taza. "Give this to Ramirez," she ordered. "Tell him to take it not to Cedar Flats, but to the federal marshal in Tucson, and tell him to give a copy to the lieutenant at the fort. It will not stop the whispers," Taza said, weighing the letter in his hand. "No," Nell agreed, "but it turns their gossip into a criminal record. I am done being a story they tell in the dark. Taza, I am writing my own history now." Taza looked at her. For the first time in days, a genuine smile touched his lips. "You fight with ink as well as you fight with a Colt revolver." The rains came 2 nights later. It was a rare, torrential downpour that turned the dust to mud and made the world smell of wet sage and ozone. The camp hunkered down. Nell was in her shelter, listening to the drumming of the water on the hides. When the flap opened, Taza ducked inside. He was soaked, his hair plastered to his skull, water dripping from the fringe of his buckskin shirt. "The horses were spooked by the thunder," he said, by way of explanation. "I was checking the line." "You are shivering," Nell said. She gestured to the small fire burning in the center of the lodge. "Sit, dry yourself." Taza sat. The space was small, intimate. The storm outside created a wall of sound that isolated them from the rest of the world. They were alone in a bubble of firelight and shadows. Nell watched the firelight play across his face. He was a beautiful man, she realized, not in the soft, pampered way of the men in magazines, but in the way a mountain is beautiful sharp, enduring, and dangerous. "Why did you come back for me?" Nell asked suddenly. It was the question that had been haunting her. "In the canyon, you could have ridden away. You could have saved yourself." Taza stared into the flames. "I told you, I do not leave debts unpaid." "That is a lie," Nell said softly. "You do not owe me anything." Taza looked up. His eyes locked with hers. The air in the shelter grew heavy, charged with the electricity of the storm. I was afraid, Taza admitted. His voice was rough. For a long time, Nell, I thought love was a weakness. I saw warriors lose their focus because they feared for their wives. I saw my father weep when my mother died. I told myself I would never carry that weight. A warrior must be light to move fast. He reached out, his hand hovering near the fire. But when I saw you on that cliff, when I saw the gun pointed at you, I realized that without that weight, I was not flying. I was just empty. Nell moved closer to him. She could smell the rain on his skin, the wood smoke, and the scent of him, something earthy and alive. I was afraid too, she whispered. I thought love was a transaction. My father taught me that affection was something you bought with obedience. I thought if I let a man close, he would own me. He would put a price tag on my soul. She reached out and took his hand. It was large and warm, engulfing hers. She guided his hand to her chest, placing his palm flat over her heart. It was beating fast, a frantic, bird-like rhythm against her ribs. Listen, Nell said. Does that sound like a transaction? Taza felt the beat. He felt the life surging beneath the simple cotton of her shirt. He shook his head slowly. No, it sounds like thunder. It is yours, Nell said. Not because you bought it, not because you saved me, but because I give it to you, freely. Taza made a sound in his throat, a low groan of surrender. He leaned forward. Nell met him halfway. The kiss was not tentative. It was a collision of two people who had been starving for a connection that didn't hurt. Taza's mouth was hot, tasting of rain. His hands, usually so disciplined, tangled in her hair, pulling her closer. Nell wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her body against the solid wall of his chest. There was desperation in it, yes, but there was also a profound, aching tenderness. He touched her as if she were made of glass that he was terrified to break, and she held him as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. They sank back onto the buffalo robes, the firelight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls of the wickiup. Outside, the rain washed the desert clean, erasing the tracks of the soldiers, the posse, and the past. Inside, there was only the heat of skin on skin, the murmur of names spoken like prayers, and the profound, terrifying freedom of choosing to belong to another. The morning brought a sky of impossible blue. The air was crisp and cold. Nell sat outside the shelter, braiding her hair. She felt different. The hollow space inside her was not gone. Scars did not vanish overnight, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with a quiet, humming strength. Taza sat nearby, repairing a bridle. He worked with his usual focus, but every few minutes, his eyes would flick to her, and the look that passed between them was enough to ignite the air. Nell reached into her pocket. She pulled out the turquoise pendant. The leather thong it had hung on was old and frayed, worn thin by years of worry. She took her knife and cut the old leather. She threw the strip into the dying embers of the fire. It curled and vanished in a puff of smoke. She walked over to Taza. "Give me your wrist." Taza paused. He held out his left arm. He wore a leather wrist guard, secured by sturdy rawhide laces. Nell threaded the turquoise stone onto one of the loose ends of his wrist guard. She tied it securely, knotting it 3 times. The blue stone rested against his pulse, stark against his dark skin. "My mother said this stone was the sky crumbled into pieces," Nell said. "She said it was for protection. I don't need it anymore. I have found my sky." Taza looked at the stone, then at her. He understood the magnitude of the gesture. She was not marking him as property. She was binding her history to his future. "It will not be easy," Taza said. "The town will not forgive. The army will not forget. We are walking a path full of thorns." "Then we will wear boots," Nell said pragmatically. "We cannot stay here. Taza, Nantan is right. The camp is not safe, and the gossip will poison the water if we stay too long. We need to go where the name Hartley means nothing." "There is a place," Taza said slowly. "South, across the border, in the Sierra Madre. The bluecoats cannot follow there. The water is cold, and the grass is high. My mother's people used to winter there." "Is it far?" "It is 100 miles of hard riding," Taza said, "through the heat in the snake country." Nell looked south, toward the jagged peaks on the horizon. 100 miles. 100 miles away from the jail cell where her father sat. 100 miles away from the judgment of Cedar Flats. 100 miles toward a life that was hers to build. "When do we leave?" Nell asked. "The horses need 2 days to rest." Taza said, "Then we ride." Nell nodded. She picked up a bucket to fetch water. 2 days. That is enough time to say goodbye to the ghosts. She walked toward the stream, her head high. She was no longer the rancher's daughter, nor the victim of the canyon. She was a woman who had walked through the fire and come out carrying the flame, and she was ready to burn a new path through the wilderness, in the shadows of the camp. However, not everyone was content. A young brave, whose brother had been wounded in the canyon fight, watched them with sullen eyes. And miles away, in the muddied streets of Cedar Flats, Harlan Crow lay in a doctor's bed, a hole in his shoulder and a burning, obsessive hatred in his heart. The story was winding down, but the echoes of violence had a long memory. For now, though, there was the sun, there was the work, and there was the man with the turquoise stone on his wrist, watching her back as she walked to the water. That was enough. The heat of the Arizona summer did not leave all at once. It retreated inch by inch, surrendering the territory to the golden, mellow light of October. The violent haboobs that had scoured the land in July were gone, replaced by a sky so clear and deep it looked like an inverted ocean. The cottonwoods along the creek beds turned a brilliant, trembling yellow, signaling a shift not just in the season, but in the soul of the land. In the high camp of the Dragoon Mountains, the frantic pace of survival had slowed into the steady, rhythmic breathing of daily life. The threat of the cavalry had receded, with Barlow awaiting trial in Yuma and the true nature of his smuggling ring exposed. The army had turned its attention elsewhere. The Apache band was no longer a target to be hunted, but a people to be wary of a distinct improvement in the politics of the borderlands. Eleanor Hartley Nell sat on a flat expanse of granite, watching the sun dip toward the western horizon. She wore a dress made of soft deerskin, bleached white by the sun and the skill of the women who had taught her to tan hides. It was practical, durable, and fitted her form without restricting her movement. The blue dress with the high collar, the one she had worn on the day she was sold, had been cut up weeks ago to make bandages and cleaning rags. It was a fitting end for a garment that had been a costume for a lie. She heard the soft crunch of boots on gravel behind her. She did not flinch. She knew the cadence of those steps as well as she knew her own heartbeat. Taza sat down beside her. He did not speak immediately. He simply handed her a piece of dried venison and a tin cup of coffee. It was poor coffee, bitter and thick, traded from Ramirez. But to Nell, it tasted of peace. "The snow will come to these peaks in 4 weeks, Taza said, looking at the distant, jagged spine of the mountains. "The passes will close. Then we must be gone before then," Nell replied. She took a sip of the coffee. "Have you spoken to Nantan?" "I have," Taza said. "He says the southern trail is clear. He says the water in the Sierra Madre is cold enough to freeze your teeth, but the grass is belly-high to a horse." He turned to look at her. His face, once guarded and tight with the stress of command, was open now. The turquoise stone she had tied to his wrist guard caught the last rays of the sun, flashing a brilliant, defiant blue. "He also says," Taza continued, "that you are free to go north. The lieutenant sent word through Ramirez. The charges against you, whatever the town gossips invented, are dropped. You are a free woman. Eleanor, you could go to Tucson. You could open a dress shop. You could live in a house with glass windows and wooden floors." Nell looked at the horizon, toward the invisible smudge of smoke that marked the towns of the white settlers. She thought of the glass windows. She thought of the wooden floors. And then she thought of the whispers that would follow her through those rooms. The girl who was sold. The girl who lived with the savages. She would never be just Nell there. She would always be a scandal, a victim, a cautionary tale told to frighten willful daughters. I have realized something. Taza, Nell said softly. Belonging is not a place you go to. It is a thing you build. If I go back there, I am begging for a place at their table. I am done begging. She turned to him, her eyes fierce and golden in the twilight. I do not want a house with glass windows if I have to look out of them alone. I want a fire that I built myself. I want the ground under my feet to be mine. Taza nodded. A slow, solemn movement. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, the calluses on his palm rough against her skin. Then we go south, he said. There is a valley I know. It has a spring that never runs dry, even in the drought. We will build a cabin, not a wickiup, but a cabin of logs and stone. We will catch wild horses and break them with gentle hands. It will be hard work. Nell, your back will ache, and your hands will bleed. There will be no Sunday socials. I hate Sunday socials, Nell said, a smile breaking across her face. And I am not afraid of work. I am only afraid of a life lived in a cage. Then it is decided, Taza said. We leave at the new moon. Before they could leave, there was one final piece of the past that needed to be laid to rest. 3 days later, they rode down from the stronghold to a neutral meeting ground, Ramirez's trading post, a ramshackle adobe structure sitting on the edge of the reservation line. It was here that they met Lieutenant Miller. The lieutenant looked tired. His uniform was dusty, and he looked like a man who had spent too much time writing reports and not enough time sleeping. But when he saw Nell and Taza ride in, he stood up and touched the brim of his hat with genuine respect. Miss Hartley, the lieutenant said. Taza. Lieutenant, Nell acknowledged. She dismounted with a grace she had not possessed 2 months ago. She stood beside Taza, shoulder to shoulder. They looked like two parts of the same weapon. I have the papers, the lieutenant said, handing a thick envelope to Nell. The marshal in Tucson accepted your affidavit. Barlow has been indicted on 12 counts of treason and smuggling. He will never see the outside of a prison cell again. And Silas? Nell asked. Her voice did not waver, but Taza shifted slightly closer to her. Your father is in custody, the lieutenant said carefully. He is being held as a material witness. He is safe. Miss Hartley, he has a roof and food, but he is a broken man. He asks for you every day. Nell looked at the envelope in her hand. She thought of her father, trembling in the canyon, screaming, I sold her to save his own skin. She felt the old, jagged pain of it, but it was distant now, like a scar from a wound that had finally closed. I have written a letter, Nell said. She pulled a folded piece of parchment from her belt. Please give this to him. The lieutenant took the letter. Is it forgiveness? Nell looked at the vast, open desert. No, Lieutenant. Forgiveness implies that what he did was a mistake. What he did was a choice. This letter is a release. I am telling him that I am no longer holding on to the rope he tied around my neck. I am cutting it, for his sake and for mine. She looked the lieutenant in the eye. Tell him I am alive. Tell him I am well. And tell him that the daughter he sold is gone. The woman who remains belongs only to herself. The lieutenant nodded, tucking the letter into his tunic. I will tell him. There is one more thing, Taza said. His voice was deep, commanding the space. We leave the territory tomorrow. We go where your maps do not reach, but before we go, we wish to make a promise, and we require a witness who carries the law of the white man. The lieutenant looked surprised. Marriage. Union, Taza corrected. We do not need a priest to tell us what is in our hearts, but Eleanor wishes for it to be recorded, so that no man can say she was taken against her will. The ceremony took place at sunset, behind the trading post, where a small fire had been built against the chill of the evening. There were only 4 people present. The lieutenant stood on one side of the fire, representing the laws of the territory. On the other side stood Ilth-Kaz, the Apache woman whose son Nell had healed. She represented the laws of the earth and the tribe. Nell and Taza stood between them. They did not hold hands. They stood facing each other, looking into each other's faces with an intensity that made the lieutenant look away, feeling like an intruder on something sacred. "I have no ring to give you," Taza said. He spoke in English, for the benefit of the witness, but his eyes spoke a language older than words. "I have only my hands, my horse, and my life. I offer them to you, not as a master to a servant, not as a buyer to a seller, but as the earth offers itself to the rain. I will stand between you and the wind. I will stand between you and the wolf, and I will never, ever stand between you and your freedom." Nell felt tears prick her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She reached out and took his face in her hands. "I have no dowry," Nell said, her voice clear and strong. "I have no name that is honored in this land, but I have my hands, my will, and my heart. I offer them to you. I will walk beside you on the trail, not behind you. I will carry my own weight, and I will never let you walk alone in the dark." Taza leaned down and kissed her. It was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss of the storm. It was a seal, a quiet, terrifyingly absolute promise. Ilthkaz stepped forward and sprinkled yellow corn pollen over their heads, a blessing for fertility and a long road. The lieutenant cleared his throat, looking strangely moved. By the power of the fact that you are two of the stubbornest people I have ever met," the lieutenant said. "I recognize this union. Good luck to you both. You are going to need it." "We do not need luck," Taza said, taking Nell's hand. "We have the map." "What map?" the lieutenant asked. Taza tapped his own chest, over his heart, the one that leads home. The next morning they rode out. The departure was not a flight. It was a procession of two. They rode south, away from the trading post, away from the army forts, away from the town of Cedar Flats with its church bells and its hypocrisies. The sun was rising, painting the desert in hues of violent orange and soft purple. The air was crisp, smelling of sagebrush and promise. Nell rode the pinto mare Taza had given her. Her saddlebags were packed with supplies, flour, coffee, ammunition, and seeds for a garden she would plant in the spring. She wore the buckskin dress, and around her neck, she wore nothing. The turquoise stone was on Taza's wrist. She looked over at him. He rode his tall bay horse with the easy grace of a man born in the saddle. He was scanning the horizon, always watching, always protecting. But when he sensed her gaze, he turned and smiled. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. Nell thought of the journey ahead. It would be 100 miles of hard riding. There would be winter storms. There would be droughts. There would be men who would look at them with hate because they dared to cross the boundaries of race and custom. But as she watched the sun catch the turquoise on his wrist, flashing that brilliant sky-blue light, Nell felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She had been a daughter defined by her father's debts. She had been a woman defined by her society's rules. She had been a victim defined by her captivity. Now, she was none of those things. She remembered the words she had written in the letter to her father, the words that were currently riding in the pocket of a lieutenant back to the sad, gray cell where Silas waited. "You sold me for silver. Pa, you thought I was a thing to be traded, but you were wrong. You didn't sell me. You set me loose. You broke the chain that held me to a life that was too small for me. And in the wilderness you feared, I found a man who does not know how to own things, only how to cherish them." The wind kicked up, ruffling the mane of her horse. It was not the scouring wind of the haboob, stinging and cruel. It was a fresh wind, blowing from the south, carrying the scent of pine and water from the high peaks of the Sierra Madre. "Are you ready, Nell?" Taza called out, his voice carrying over the distance between them. Nell spurred her horse forward, closing the gap until she was riding stirrup to stirrup with him. She looked at the open trail stretching out before them, a ribbon of possibility winding through the red earth. "I am ready," Nell said. They kicked their horses into a gallop. They did not look back. They rode into the sun, two specks of life against the vast, indifferent grandeur of the West, bound not by paper or law, but by the wild, enduring freedom of their own choice. The story of the girl who was sold ended there. The story of the woman who built her own world was just beginning. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this journey through the dust and redemption of the American frontier, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to know where you are listening from. Let's see how far these Wild West tales can travel. Please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, to catch the next adventure. Hit the like button if Nell and Taza's story touched your heart. And don't forget to smash that hype button to help this story be heard by more people around the world. Your support keeps the campfire burning. Safe travels, partners.